My name is Nettie Montgomery, 62 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew what my life would look like after my husband died. William and I were married for 40 years, building a real estate empire worth $45 million from nothing. When heart failure took him from us, my son Jacob and his wife Diane immediately took control. Looking me straight in the eyes, Jacob said, "Do not expect a dime from Dad's estate," while Diane smirked, "We are in charge now." They had no idea what William had actually planned. The moment our lawyer read the first line of the will, I watched their smug expressions shatter completely. If you want to hear how a lifetime of love and loyalty was ultimately rewarded, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from. Some stories of justice are too satisfying not to share. William Montgomery and I met in 1983 when I was working as a nurse at Boston General Hospital. He was not the wealthy real estate mogul the business world would later know. He was just Will then, a skinny 25-year-old with a broken arm and big dreams. He had fallen off a ladder while painting an apartment he was hoping to lease. As I wrapped his cast, he talked nonstop about his vision for transforming rundown neighborhoods into thriving communities. Most people would have dismissed him as a dreamer, but something in his eyes, a determination and kindness combined, made me believe every word. On our first date, he took me to an abandoned warehouse and spent 2 hours describing how he could convert it into affordable housing if he could just secure the financing. Instead of dinner and a movie, we walked through dilapidated buildings while he sketched renovation plans on napkins. I found his passion infectious. While other nurses were dating doctors or businessmen with established careers, I was falling for a man who owned nothing but a rusted pickup truck and an unshakable belief in himself. We married after just 10 months of dating, in a simple ceremony at my parents' backyard. My father, a factory worker, had serious reservations about my choice. "He has got nothing to his name, Nettie," he warned. "Dreams do not pay the bills." My mother was more supportive. "I see how he looks at you, like you are his partner, not just his wife. That is worth something." Our first years together were lean. We lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Boston. I worked double shifts at the hospital, while William hustled to make connections in real estate. Every evening, our kitchen table disappeared under blueprints and loan applications. I would come home exhausted from 12-hour nursing shifts to find him still awake revising business plans or studying market trends. When I became pregnant with Jacob in our second year of marriage, William panicked. He was still struggling to secure his first real development deal, and now we had a baby on the way. I remember him pacing our small living room, running calculations on how much diapers and formula would cost. I picked up extra weekend shifts, saving every penny for the baby while assuring William that we would find a way. Jacob was born in the middle of winter during the worst snowstorm Boston had seen in decades. William had to dig our car out of 3 feet of snow to get me to the hospital. By then, he had finally secured a small loan to purchase and renovate a 4-unit apartment building. The timing was almost comical, as he had to juggle visits to the maternity ward with meetings with contractors. Jacob was 2 weeks old when William carried him around his first property acquisition, whispering to our sleeping son, "Someday all this will be yours." Those early years blur together in a montage of exhaustion and determination. When Jacob was 3, I gave birth to our daughter Emma. By then, William had successfully renovated and leased his first building, generating enough income for him to take on a second slightly larger property. Our financial situation had improved enough that I could reduce my nursing hours to part-time, balancing childcare with my career. William's first big break came when he was 35. A local bank that had noticed his success with small properties offered him financing for a significant mixed-use development, a former industrial site that he would transform into retail spaces and loft apartments. It was a massive risk, requiring more capital than anything he had attempted before. We had many late-night discussions about whether to take the leap. If it fails, we could lose everything. I worried, thinking about our 2 small children. "If it succeeds, we build the foundation for everything I have ever wanted to create," he countered. "I need you with me on this, Nettie. I cannot do it without your support." I remember the night I finally agreed. We sat on the floor of our modest living room after the children were asleep, a bottle of cheap wine between us. "Okay," I said, "but promise me one thing, Will. No matter what happens with the business, we stay the same people. We do not let money change us." He took my hand and made that promise one that he kept throughout our marriage, even as success beyond our wildest dreams followed. That first major development succeeded spectacularly, establishing William Montgomery as a visionary in urban renewal. Over the next decade, Montgomery Developments expanded across Massachusetts, then throughout New England, eventually becoming one of the most respected real estate development companies on the East Coast. As our financial situation transformed, I maintained my nursing career, eventually moving into healthcare administration. William never questioned my desire to keep working, understanding that my career was part of my identity. However, I also embraced my role in supporting his business success. I hosted dinners for potential investors, attended charity galas where connections were made, and provided a sounding board for his ideas. Most importantly, I was his emotional anchor during the inevitable crises that came with growing a business. When the recession of the early 1990s threatened to derail a major development, I sat with him night after night, helping him restructure financing and reassuring him that his track record would see him through. When a contractor disappeared with a substantial advance payment, I helped him work through his anger and focus on solutions rather than retribution. Through it all, we maintained the core of our relationship, even as we moved into increasingly luxurious homes, eventually settling in an estate in Brookline, one of Boston's most exclusive suburbs. We kept our weekly date nights sacred. Every Friday, regardless of business demands or social obligations, we would spend time together, often doing something that reminded us of our humble beginnings. William might take me to see a property he was considering, echoing our unusual first dates, or we would have a simple dinner at the small Italian restaurant where we had celebrated his first successful deal. As our wealth grew, we discovered we had different philosophies about raising children with privilege. Jacob was 7 and Emma was 4 when we moved into our first truly luxurious home. William, remembering his own childhood struggles in a working-class family from South Boston, wanted to give our children everything he had lacked, from the best private schools to lavish birthdays and generous allowances. I worried about the effects of such privilege. They need to understand the value of hard work. Will, I argued after he bought 14-year-old Jacob an expensive watch for Christmas, how will they appreciate what you have built if everything comes easily to them? I worked hard precisely, so my children would not have to struggle like I did. He would counter, what is the point of success if not to give them advantages? This fundamental disagreement would prove prophetic as our children grew into very different adults, shaped partly by our differing approaches to parenting them through privilege. From an early age, Jacob and Emma demonstrated markedly different responses to our family's increasing wealth. Jacob, our firstborn, seemed to absorb the trappings of wealth as his birthright. I first noticed the troubling signs when he was around 10 years old. We had recently moved into our Brookline estate, complete with a swimming pool and tennis court. Jacob began introducing himself to new friends by mentioning our address first, then inviting them over to see our mansion, a term we never used ourselves. One incident stands out in my memory. Jacob was 12 when he had a classmate over for a school project. The boy, Kevin, was from a middle-class family and appeared slightly overwhelmed by our home. As Jacob showed him around, his tone became increasingly condescending, ending with, "My dad could probably buy your dad's company if he wanted to." I overheard this and was mortified, immediately pulling Jacob aside for a stern conversation about respect and humility. When I told William about the incident, he merely chuckled and said, "The boy is just proud of what his old man has accomplished." William's indulgence of Jacob's growing sense of entitlement created a pattern that would continue throughout his childhood. When Jacob received poor grades in 8th grade, William donated a new computer lab to the school. When Jacob was caught cheating on a test in 10th grade, William hired expensive attorneys to fight the suspension, arguing successfully that the teacher had not provided clear instructions. Despite middling academic performance and SAT scores, Jacob was admitted to Cornell University after William established a substantial scholarship fund. During college, Jacob drove a new Porsche, lived in a luxury apartment instead of a dormitory, and rarely attended classes unless absolutely necessary. I expressed my concerns to William repeatedly, but he would dismiss them with comments like, "College is about making connections, not just grades. He is networking with the right people." It was at Cornell that Jacob met Diane Miller, a strikingly beautiful economics major from a respectable but decidedly middle-class family in Connecticut. From the beginning, I sensed that Diane viewed Jacob primarily as a ticket to wealth and status. During their courtship, she made frequent comments about designer brands, asked detailed questions about our family's net worth, and seemed more interested in William's business connections than in Jacob himself. Their wedding 3 years after graduation set the tone for their married life. What William and I had envisioned as a meaningful family celebration became under Diane's direction a 3-day extravaganza featuring celebrity performers, exotic flowers flown in from South America, and gift bags for guests containing items worth more than what many families earn in a month. The final cost exceeded $2 million, a sum that made even William raise his eyebrows, though he ultimately paid it without complaint. Following their honeymoon, a 6-week tour of European luxury destinations, Jacob finally entered the family business. William created a vice president position for him, complete with a corner office and executive assistant. Despite the impressive title, Jacob's actual responsibilities were limited and carefully supervised. William would privately correct Jacob's mistakes, rework his proposals, and smooth over relationships with clients and contractors who found Jacob arrogant and unprepared. I observed all this with growing concern, occasionally attempting to discuss it with William. "We are setting him up for failure, Will," I would argue. "He needs to learn the business from the ground up, not be handed authority he has not earned." "He is my son and heir," William would respond. "The sooner people get used to respecting him, the better. He will grow into the role." But Jacob showed little interest in actually growing into anything. He treated the business as an ATM rather than a responsibility, frequently missing important meetings for golf outings or arriving unprepared for client presentations. His sense of entitlement extended to his treatment of employees, especially those who had been with the company since before his arrival. More than once, I heard longtime staff discussing Jacob's dismissive attitude toward their experience and expertise. In stark contrast, our daughter Emma approached her privileged upbringing with humility and purpose. From childhood, she demonstrated an independence that both impressed and occasionally worried me. When Emma was 16, she announced at dinner one night that she had taken a part-time job at a local veterinary clinic. William was perplexed, pointing out that her allowance was more than generous. "I want to earn something for myself," she explained, "and I like helping the animals." This same spirit guided her decision to pursue medicine, a choice that Jacob openly mocked. "Why waste time in medical school when you could just join the family business and start making real money right away?" he asked during a family dinner celebrating Emma's acceptance to medical school. "Do you know how much doctors make compared to real estate developers?" "Not everything is about money, Jacob," Emma replied calmly. "I want to help people." William and I had agreed to pay for Emma's undergraduate education, but when it came to medical school, Emma insisted on applying for scholarships and student loans like her classmates. William privately established a trust that would help pay off her loans after graduation, but respected her wish to make her own way during her training. During her second year of medical school, Emma met David Chen, a dedicated public school teacher who shared her values and compassionate nature. Their courtship was a refreshing contrast to Jacob and Diane's status-conscious relationship. David proposed with his grandmother's modest diamond ring, and they planned a small wedding that focused on family and friends rather than spectacle. Jacob and Diane attended Emma's wedding with barely concealed disdain. Diane commented loudly on the simplicity of the venue, a charming historical boathouse overlooking the Charles River, while Jacob complained about the wine selection. I overheard him telling a cousin, "I guess this is what you get when you marry a teacher instead of someone with actual prospects." As Jacob and Diane established their married life, their extravagance seemed to increase exponentially. They purchased a penthouse in downtown Boston and a summer home on Nantucket, both decorated by celebrity interior designers. Their garage housed a rotating collection of exotic cars, and Diane's closets overflowed with designer clothing, many items worn only once before being discarded. They employed a staff of 5 for just the 2 of them, including a personal chef and a full-time housekeeper. When they had children first, a son they named William Jr., though they never called him that, preferring the trendier Liam, and then a daughter named Victoria, their parenting style was predictably hands-off. A rotation of nannies handled the day-to-day care of the children, with Jacob and Diane making appearances for photo-worthy moments that would look good on social media. Family gatherings became increasingly tense affairs, with Jacob and Diane often arriving late, leaving early, or canceling altogether if something more exciting came up. William noticed their behavior but continued to make excuses for Jacob. "He is under a lot of pressure at work," he would say, though we both knew Jacob's role at the company remained largely ceremonial. As the years passed, William and I had several private conversations about Jacob's character and his future role in the business. Late at night, after particularly disappointing interactions with our son William would admit his concerns. I built this company from nothing," he confided once after Jacob had bungled a major development deal that William had to personally salvage. "I wanted to create something lasting, something that would continue to provide jobs and improve communities long after I'm gone. But Jacob does not see beyond the next quarter's profits or his next luxury purchase. It is not too late to change things," I suggested gently. "You could require him to earn his position to learn the business properly." William would nod thoughtfully during these conversations, but taking action against his only son proved difficult for him. The pattern continued, with William enabling Jacob's entitlement while privately acknowledging the problems it created. Little did I know that my husband was contemplating a solution more decisive than I could have imagined. William's health had always been remarkably good for a man who worked the long hours he did. He prided himself on his morning runs and weekend golf games, often joking that stress rolled off him because he was too stubborn for heart attacks. The irony was not lost on either of us when at age 67 he was diagnosed with advanced heart disease following what we had initially dismissed as heartburn. The cardiologist did not mince words. Multiple arteries were severely blocked, and while bypass surgery was an option, William's heart had already sustained significant damage. With proper medication, lifestyle changes, and regular monitoring, he might have 5 to 10 more years, without intervention much less. William took the news with characteristic determination. "Well then," he said as we drove home from the appointment, "I guess I better make sure everything is in order for when I am not around to fix things anymore." Jacob's initial reaction to his father's diagnosis was revealing. His first question was not about treatment options or prognosis, but about the business. "Should we announce this to the shareholders?" he asked during a family dinner the day after the diagnosis. "We need to manage expectations about your involvement going forward." William looked at his son with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between disappointment and resignation. "The company will be fine, Jacob. Right now, I am more concerned with spending quality time with my family." Over the next few weeks, as William recovered from bypass surgery, Jacob became increasingly insistent about formalizing succession plans for Montgomery Developments. "You need to name me CEO now," he argued during one of his brief hospital visits. "The board needs clear leadership, and announcing it while you are still here to oversee the transition makes the most sense." Against my private advice, William eventually agreed to elevate Jacob to CEO, though with significant conditions. The board would maintain enhanced oversight powers, major decisions would require supermajority approval, and several longtime executives would have protected positions. Jacob chafed at these restrictions, but accepted them as the price of the title he coveted. As William's health stabilized and he began his recovery, I took on the role of primary caretaker. After 40 years of marriage, I knew his habits and preferences better than any hired nurse could. I monitored his medications, prepared heart-healthy meals that he reluctantly ate, and accompanied him to medical appointments. Though I had retired from nursing years earlier, my medical background proved invaluable in managing his care. Emma visited regularly despite her busy schedule as a pediatric resident and mother to 2 young children. She would bring her kids, who would crawl into bed with their grandfather and tell him about school or show him artwork they had made. These visits visibly brightened William's spirits, and I often found him more energetic after spending time with Emma and her family. Jacob's visits, in contrast, were infrequent and focused almost entirely on business matters. He would arrive with folders of documents requiring signatures or decisions, barely inquiring about William's health before launching into company updates or market analyses. Diane rarely accompanied him, sending impersonal flower arrangements instead of making personal appearances. As months passed and William adjusted to his new normal, I noticed him engaging in activities that seemed unusual. He began having regular meetings with Howard Goldstein, his longtime friend and attorney, always insisting on privacy during these conversations. When I asked about these meetings, William would smile mysteriously and say, "Just making sure all our ducks are in a row, Nettie. Nothing for you to worry about." He also spent hours in his home office reviewing old records and photographs, organizing files that had been neglected for years. Sometimes I would find him looking through albums from our early years, lingering over photos of our first apartment or the children when they were small. During this period of relative stability, William and I had several profound conversations about our life together and what truly mattered to him. Lying in bed one night, he took my hand and spoke with unusual vulnerability. "I want you to know something, Nettie. Everything I have built, everything I have accomplished, none of it would have been possible without you." You believed in me when I had nothing but ideas and determination. You worked those double shifts at the hospital so I could chase my dreams. You gave me a home and a family that anchored me through all the challenges. Whatever happens next, I want you to remember that I know exactly who made my success possible." I tried to brush off his seriousness. "We are a team, Will. We always have been." "Yes," he agreed, "but I am not sure I have always acknowledged your contribution properly. I want to make sure that is corrected." On another occasion, after Emma and her family had visited, William made me promise something specific. "Take care of Emma and her children, Nettie. She is the true legacy we should be proud of. A doctor who cares more about helping others than accumulating wealth. How did we get so lucky with her?" I smiled. "She has your determination and my compassion. A good combination." William nodded thoughtfully. "Jacob is so much like my father, focused on appearances, on what others think of him. I tried to give him what I never had, but maybe that was exactly the wrong approach." These conversations, coupled with his mysterious legal meetings, should have prepared me for what was to come, but I was so focused on his health and comfort that I missed the signs of the plan he was methodically putting into place. In our last year together, William's health declined steadily despite the best medical care. His energy diminished, and he was forced to use a wheelchair for anything beyond short walks around the house. Still, his mind remained sharp, and he continued to check in on company business through video calls with trusted executives, notably excluding Jacob from many of these discussions. Our last Christmas as a family was particularly tense. Jacob and Diane arrived 3 hours late for dinner, having attended another party they deemed more important. During the meal, Jacob contradicted several of William's business opinions, speaking to his father with barely concealed impatience. "That might have worked in your day, Dad, but markets are different now. We need to be more aggressive." William said little in response, but I noticed how he watched Jacob throughout the evening, his expression thoughtful and evaluating. After dessert, when Emma was helping me in the kitchen, William asked Jacob to join him in his study. They emerged 20 minutes later, Jacob looking frustrated, and William appearing resigned but resolute. Later that night, William told me, "I tried one last time to make him understand what matters. I do not think he heard me." William passed away peacefully at home 3 months later, with me holding one hand and Emma the other. Jacob was not present, having decided to attend an industry conference in New York, despite knowing his father's condition had worsened significantly. By the time he arrived, hours after William had drawn his last breath, his primary concern seemed to be the timing of the will reading and the announcement to the company board. As he stood in the doorway of the bedroom where his father's body still lay, Jacob's first words were not of grief, but of business. "We will need to issue a press release first thing tomorrow. I should be the one to address the employees." In that moment, looking at my son's calculating expression, I realized how completely he had missed the lessons his father had tried to teach him about what truly constitutes a successful life. What I did not yet know was just how thoroughly William had prepared for exactly this outcome. The morning of William's funeral dawned crisp and clear, a beautiful spring day that seemed at odds with the somber occasion. The service was held at Trinity Church in Copley Square, where William and I had occasionally attended Christmas services. The historic church was filled to capacity with over 500 attendees, a testament to William's impact on both the business community and the many charitable organizations he had supported over the years. Jacob positioned himself prominently at the entrance, shaking hands with business associates and accepting condolences with practiced solemnity. He had insisted on handling all the funeral arrangements, overriding many of my suggestions about what William would have wanted. The result was more corporate than personal, with elaborate flower displays bearing company logos and a professionally produced video tribute that emphasized William's business accomplishments while barely mentioning his family life. Diane stood beside Jacob, dressed in a designer black dress that seemed more appropriate for a fashion show than a funeral, accessorized with diamond jewelry that caught the light as she moved. She kept her hand possessively on Jacob's arm, murmuring comments in his ear as important business figures approached. I overheard her saying to a friend, "Jacob will be making some significant changes at the company." William was brilliant, of course, but his approaches were becoming somewhat outdated. Emma arrived with David and their children, immediately coming to embrace me in a long, genuine hug. "How are you holding up, Mom?" she asked, her eyes red from crying. Unlike Jacob, who had maintained a stoic, almost performative demeanor since William's death, Emma allowed her grief to show honestly. Her husband David stood supportively at her side, occasionally wiping away his own tears. He had genuinely liked and respected his father-in-law, often seeking William's advice about everything from home repairs to career decisions. The service itself was dignified but impersonal, with the minister offering generic platitudes about William's contributions to the community. When it came time for family reflections, I spoke first, sharing memories of our early struggles and William's unwavering integrity throughout his success. I talked about the man behind the business reputation, the husband who still brought me wildflowers on ordinary Tuesdays, the father who taught our children to swim in the public pool before we could afford our own, the grandfather who got down on the floor to play with Emma's children despite his failing health. Jacob's eulogy, in contrast, focused almost exclusively on William's business acumen and the legacy of Montgomery Developments. He spoke of continuing his father's vision, though he described that vision in terms of market dominance and profit margins rather than the community revitalization that had always been William's true passion. There was something rehearsed about his grief, as if he were playing the role of bereaved son rather than actually experiencing the emotion. Following the service, many of William's longtime business associates approached me with genuine condolences and stories about my husband that I had never heard. Thomas Richardson, William's first investor and longtime friend, hugged me tightly and whispered, "He was the most honest developer I ever met. This industry will not be the same without him." Susan Chen, who had been William's executive assistant for over 20 years before Jacob replaced her with someone younger, pressed a card into my hand. "If you need anything at all, Nettie, William was more than a boss to me, and you have always been so kind." Richard Donnelly, the director of the Community Development Foundation William had established, spoke with tears in his eyes about the projects they had worked on together. "He never forgot where he came from," Richard said. "Every time we opened affordable housing or a community center in a neighborhood he had grown up in, I could see how much it meant to him." Throughout the reception, I noticed many of these same associates reacting with subtle surprise when Jacob introduced himself as the new CEO and discussed his plans for the company's future. Their polite nods and noncommittal responses suggested a reservation about his leadership that contrasted sharply with their genuine respect for William. The day after the funeral, Jacob moved into William's office at company headquarters. I learned this, not from him directly, but from Susan, who called to tell me that Jacob had instructed the maintenance staff to remove all of William's personal items and place them in storage. "He did not even look through them first," she said, the hurt evident in her voice. 40 years of memories, and he treated them like they were office supplies to be inventoried. Within a week, Jacob had fired Susan, replacing her with a young man who had previously worked at a hedge fund known for aggressive corporate takeovers. When I called to express my concern about this decision, Jacob dismissed my input. "Susan was Dad's assistant mom. She is not a good fit for my management style. The severance package was generous." The changes Jacob implemented at Montgomery Developments came rapidly after that. William had always prioritized quality construction, fair pricing for tenants, and long-term relationships with contractors and suppliers. Jacob immediately pushed for cost-cutting measures that compromised quality, substantial rent increases across all properties, and renegotiated contracts that squeezed long-time business partners. My grief over losing William was compounded by watching his carefully built legacy being dismantled by our son. When I attempted to discuss these changes with Jacob during a rare phone call, he cut me off. "The business world has changed, Mom. Dad's sentimental approaches were leaving money on the table. The board has approved all my initiatives based on projected revenue increases." What Jacob did not mention was that he had restructured the board shortly after taking over, removing several longtime members and replacing them with friends and connections who shared his profit-first mentality. The safeguards William had put in place were being systematically dismantled. Diane's transformation was equally concerning. She had always been status conscious, but as the wife of the CEO, she became increasingly imperious. She undertook a complete redecoration of William's office, erasing every trace of his 40 years of leadership. She began hosting exclusive luncheons for the wives of Boston's elite, positioning herself as a tastemaker and power broker. When I visited the office to collect some personal photographs that had been in William's desk, Diane gave me a tour of the renovated space with barely concealed pride. "The old design was so dated," she explained, gesturing to the sleek, minimalist furniture that had replaced William's warm, traditional decor. "We needed something that reflects a forward-thinking approach. The old guard is giving way to fresh blood." The phrase "old guard" hung in the air between us, and I realized with a chill that she was categorizing me as part of the past, something to be cleared away like the comfortable leather chairs where William had held countless mentoring sessions with young employees. A week after the funeral, Jacob suggested we have a family dinner to discuss transitional matters. I agreed, hoping this might be an opportunity to reconnect with my son during our shared grief. Emma and David were unable to attend due to a school event for their children, so it was just me, Jacob, and Diane at the large dining table in what had been William's and my home for the past 20 years. From the moment they arrived, the atmosphere felt more like a business meeting than a family gathering. Jacob had brought a leather portfolio filled with documents, which he placed beside his plate. Diane spent the first 15 minutes criticizing the decor, suggesting that the house needed a complete refresh to bring it into the current decade. After our housekeeper, Martha, served the main course, Jacob cleared his throat and opened his portfolio. "We need to discuss your living situation, Mom. This house is far too large for one person, and the maintenance costs are excessive." I put down my fork, startled by the abrupt introduction of this topic. "This is my home, Jacob. Your father and I chose it together. We raised you and Emma here." Jacob exchanged a glance with Diane before continuing. "Sentimentality aside, it makes no financial sense. The property taxes alone are astronomical, not to mention staff costs and upkeep. Your father left provisions for my continued comfort," I said, though in truth, William and I had never discussed specific details about what would happen after his death. We had always assumed there would be more time to make those arrangements. Diane gave a thin smile. "Actually, Nettie, the estate, is quite complex. The company holdings are intertwined with personal assets. Jacob, as CEO, needs to ensure optimal allocation of resources." The clinical way she discussed what had been my life with William for 40 years made my blood run cold. I looked at my son, searching for some recognition of the inappropriate nature of this conversation so soon after his father's death. Instead, I saw only calculation in his eyes. "We have been looking at some lovely condominiums in assisted living communities," Diane continued, pulling out a glossy brochure from the portfolio. "This one has excellent amenities and medical care on site. I am 62 and in perfect health," I responded, feeling a surge of indignation. "I have no need for assisted living." Jacob shrugged. "It is just practical planning, Mom. The estate needs to be settled efficiently, and maintaining this property is an unnecessary drain on resources that could be better invested." As the conversation continued, it became increasingly clear that Jacob and Diane had already made decisions about my future without any consideration for my wishes or feelings. They discussed selling the house, liquidating personal property, and streamlining what they referred to as my excessive spending habits. When I pointed out that I had always been prudent with money, even as our wealth increased, Diane actually laughed. "The household accounts tell a different story, Nettie. The gardening expenses alone are outrageous." The gardens had been William's pride and joy, a passion project he had worked on personally despite being able to afford professional landscapers. Each plant had been selected with care, many of them commemorating special moments in our life together. The idea of them being dismissed as an excessive expense felt like another death. As dessert was served, Jacob finally reached the crux of the matter. Leaning back in his chair with the confident air of someone holding all the cards, he delivered the statement that would echo in my mind for weeks to come. "The bottom line, Mom, is that you should not expect a dime from Dad's $45 million estate. The business needs that capital to grow under my leadership, and as Diane said, we are in charge now. We will ensure you have the basics covered, but the lifestyle you have become accustomed to is simply not sustainable." The casual cruelty of his words delivered over the lemon tart that had been William's favorite dessert left me momentarily speechless. Diane's self-satisfied smirk as she watched my reaction told me everything I needed to know about her role in this decision. They had planned this ambush carefully, choosing a moment when I was still raw with grief and when Emma, who would have undoubtedly challenged them, was absent. When I finally found my voice, I spoke with a calm that surprised even me. "I think it is time for you to leave. We will discuss the estate when Howard reads the will next week." Jacob seemed taken aback by my composure. He had clearly expected tears or pleading. "This is just practical reality, Mom. Dad would want the company to thrive above all else." As they gathered their things to leave, Diane paused in the foyer, glancing around assessingly. "We should get the house appraised immediately. The market is excellent right now. I closed the door behind them without responding, then sank onto the stairs, finally allowing the tears to come. In the space of a single dinner, my son had made it clear that he viewed me not as his grieving mother, but as a financial inconvenience to be managed and minimized. The depth of the betrayal was almost impossible to comprehend. Little did Jacob know that his father, who had built an empire from nothing through careful observation and strategic planning, had been watching and evaluating his son's character for years, and William Montgomery had made his own plans accordingly. The week following Jacob and Diane's devastating pronouncement was one of the most difficult of my life. The house that had been my haven for 2 decades suddenly felt precarious, as if Jacob might appear at any moment with moving boxes and eviction papers. I found myself wandering from room to room, touching William's books, his reading glasses still placed on his nightstand, his favorite sweater draped over the chair in our bedroom, wondering how much longer these tangible connections to our life together would remain in my possession. The grief of losing William, still fresh and overwhelming, was now compounded by the betrayal of our son. Each memory of Jacob as a child, the boy who had once looked at his father with adoration and run to me for comfort after skinned knees, contrasted painfully with the cold, calculating man who had sat across from me at dinner, dismissing 40 years of marriage as a financial liability. I retreated to our master bedroom, the space William and I had shared for so long. Sitting on his side of the bed, I opened the drawer of his nightstand, seeking some connection to him. Inside, I found a collection of handwritten notes and cards I had given him throughout our marriage, carefully preserved in chronological order. There were birthday cards, anniversary notes, and simple expressions of love left on his pillow on ordinary days. The fact that he had saved everyone some dating, back to the 1980s, nearly paper-thin from frequent handling, broke something open inside me. Beneath the notes was a small leather journal I had never seen before. Opening it, I recognized William's distinctive handwriting entries dating back several years. It appeared to be a private record of his thoughts, particularly regarding Jacob and the business. I hesitated, feeling as if I were intruding on his privacy, but the circumstances seemed to justify the breach. What I read confirmed what I had long suspected, but what William had rarely expressed directly to me. Jacob's handling of the Dorchester project concerns me deeply. One entry from 3 years prior read, "He pushed for cheaper materials against my explicit instructions, prioritizing short-term profit over the safety and satisfaction of future tenants. When confronted, he dismissed my concerns as outdated. I had to order the specifications changed back without his knowledge. He sees the business as a cash machine rather than a legacy of quality and integrity. I fear what will happen when I am no longer here to provide checks on his decisions." Another entry dated shortly after William's diagnosis. "Watched Jacob with the executive team today. He interrupts, dismisses decades of experience, treats Thomas and Susan with barely disguised contempt. He has the title, but none of the respect that must be earned. Emma, with no interest in the business, understands its true purpose better than her brother ever will." Difficult decisions ahead. The journal provided a window into William's growing concern about Jacob's character and his suitability to lead the company. The most recent entries from just months before his death mentioned meetings with Howard and revisions to his estate plans. "Finished the arrangements today." The final entry read, "Nettie will be protected, as will the true legacy of what we built together." Jacob may not understand now, but perhaps someday he will see that this is an act of love, not punishment. Sometimes the kindest gift is the truth, however uncomfortable. I closed the journal, holding it to my chest as fresh tears came. William had seen everything, understood everything, and had apparently taken steps to address it before his death. The mystery of his private legal meetings suddenly made sense. He had been preparing for exactly the scenario that was now unfolding. The next morning, I received an unexpected visit from Howard Goldstein, William's attorney and friend of 30 years. Howard had been present at the signing of our first mortgage, had guided the company through its expansion, and had become a trusted family friend. His arrival without prior notice suggested urgency. "Nettie," he said as Martha showed him into the living room, "I apologize for coming unannounced, but I wanted to check on you. I tried calling yesterday, but could not get through. I realized I had turned off my phone after Jacob and Diane's visit, unable to face any more confrontation. It has been a difficult few days, Howard. Please sit down. Would you like some coffee?" As Martha brought our drinks, Howard studied me with concern. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right beyond the obvious grief? Something about his gentle inquiry broke the dam of my composure. I found myself telling him about Jacob's dinner visit, his cold pronouncement about the estate, and the implied threat to my home and security. Howard listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he set down his cup with deliberate care. Jacob spoke to you about the estate before the official reading of the will. I nodded. He seemed very certain about his authority in the matter. Is he correct? Howard, did William leave everything to the business to Jacob's control? Howard shook his head slowly, a small, enigmatic smile playing at his lips. Nettie, I cannot discuss the specifics before the official reading, but I want you to know that William was extremely thorough in his estate planning. He anticipated certain scenarios. What does that mean exactly? It means you should not make any decisions or agreements regarding your living arrangements or financial future until after the will reading. In fact, I would advise you to have minimal contact with Jacob until then. His words gave me the first flicker of hope I had felt since William's death. Jacob mentioned the will reading would be next week. Yes, Tuesday at 10 in my office. I must insist that you attend in person despite what Jacob might suggest about it being a mere formality. Howard hesitated, then added, William left specific instructions about who should be present. I have already sent the required notifications. After Howard left, I sat for a long time thinking about the implications of our conversation. The subtle suggestion that William had anticipated certain scenarios, and Howard's insistence on my personal attendance hinted that my husband had indeed prepared for Jacob's potential actions after his death. That evening, Emma called, her voice tight with anger. Mom, David, and I just had the most bizarre conversation with Jacob. He called to discuss family financial restructuring and suggested we might want to manage expectations about Dad's estate. Did he speak to you about this too? I confirmed that he had sharing the details of our uncomfortable dinner. Emma's outrage was immediate and fierce. That is absolutely outrageous. Dad would never leave you vulnerable, and Jacob knows it. David and I are coming over right now. An hour later, Emma and David sat in my living room as I showed them William's journal and recounted Howard's cryptic visit. Emma read several of the journal entries, her expression shifting from anger to sadness. Dad saw it all, she said quietly. He knew exactly who Jacob has become. David, always the practical voice, asked, What do we do now? Howard advised waiting for the will reading, I replied. I think that is our best course of action. William clearly had a plan, and Howard seems confident in it. Emma nodded, squeezing my hand. Whatever happens with the estate, David and I want you to know that you always have a place with us. Our home is not as grand as this, but there is plenty of room, and the kids would love having Grandma around full time. The genuine offer brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. That means the world to me. The days before the will reading passed in a strange limbo. Jacob made several attempts to contact me, leaving increasingly impatient voicemails about preparations for transition and necessary paperwork. Following Howard's advice, I did not return his calls. On the morning of the will reading, I awoke before dawn. After weeks of emotional turmoil, I felt an unexpected calm, a sense that William was somehow still taking care of me, still anticipating and addressing problems as he had throughout our marriage. Whatever happened in Howard's office, I would face it with the dignity William would have expected of his partner of 40 years. I dressed carefully in a suit William had always admired, a deep blue, that he said matched my eyes. Around my neck I placed the simple pearl pendant he had given me on our 5th anniversary when we could barely afford such luxuries. To remind you of what we are building together, he had said as he fastened it. Something beautiful formed through persistence and time. As I prepared to leave for Howard's office, I felt William's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Whatever Jacob expected from the reading of the will, I suspected he was about to learn that his father had been several steps ahead of him all along. Howard Goldstein's law office occupied the top floor of a historic building in downtown Boston, the elegant brick exterior belying the modern, sophisticated interior. As I stepped off the elevator, I was greeted by a receptionist who clearly had been expecting me. Mrs. Montgomery, welcome. Mr. Goldstein asked to be notified immediately upon your arrival. May I get you anything while you wait? Coffee, water? I declined politely, taking a seat in the well-appointed waiting area. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could already see Jacob and Diane seated at the large table, heads together in conversation. Jacob was impeccably dressed in what I recognized as one of William's favorite designers, while Diane wore a black dress that managed to be both funeral appropriate and fashion forward. When they noticed me, Jacob offered a curt nod, while Diane merely raised an eyebrow before returning to what appeared to be a property brochure they were reviewing. Their body language suggested absolute confidence in the proceedings to come. Within minutes, Emma and David arrived, both having taken time off work to attend. Emma embraced me warmly, whispering, "We are with you, Mom, no matter what happens." David squeezed my shoulder supportively, his kind face showing concern but also reassurance. As we entered the conference room, Jacob looked up with surprise. "Emma? I did not realize you would be attending. This is primarily about business assets, which do not really concern you." "Dad was more than his business, Jacob," Emma replied evenly. "And as his daughter, I have every right to be here." Before Jacob could respond, the door opened again, and 3 unexpected attendees entered: Thomas Richardson, William's longtime friend and business partner; Susan Chen, his recently fired executive assistant; and Richard Donnelly from the Montgomery Community Development Foundation. Jacob's expression darkened immediately. "What are they doing here?" he demanded as Howard entered behind them. "This is a family matter." Howard smiled politely but firmly. Everyone present was specifically requested by William to attend the reading. As his attorney, I am following his explicit instructions. Jacob shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Fine, but let us not drag this out unnecessarily. We all have businesses to run." The subtle emphasis on "we" and the dismissive glance toward me did not go unnoticed. Howard merely nodded and took his place at the head of the conference table, arranging several documents before him with methodical precision. "Before we begin," Howard said, his tone formal but kind, "I want to thank everyone for coming today. William Montgomery was not just my client, but a dear friend for over 30 years. His careful planning for this day reflects both his business acumen and his deep concern for those he cared about." Diane sighed audibly, glancing at her watch. Jacob leaned forward impatiently. "We appreciate the sentiment, Howard, but perhaps we could move on to the substantive matters." Howard regarded Jacob steadily for a moment before continuing. "Of course, we will proceed with the formal reading of William Montgomery's last will and testament, executed 3 months before his passing, with all legal requirements fulfilled and verified." He opened the first document, adjusted his reading glasses, and began to read in a clear, measured voice. "I, William Edward Montgomery, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The standard legal preamble gave no hint of what was to come. Jacob sat back, a satisfied expression settling on his face as he reached for Diane's hand atop the table, a gesture of shared triumph. Howard continued his voice, taking on a subtle but unmistakable shift in tone as he reached the first substantive provision. "To my son Jacob, who believes that money is the measure of a man, I leave the sum of $1 million with the hope that he will learn the value of what truly matters in life." The words hung in the air for a moment before their meaning registered. Jacob's face flushed a deep red, his mouth opening and closing without producing sound. Beside him, Diane froze, her perfectly manicured hand tightening around his with what appeared to be painful force. "There must be some mistake." Jacob finally managed, his voice strangled. $1 million. The company alone is worth over $40 million. Howard looked up calmly. "There is no mistake, Jacob. If I may continue." Without waiting for a response, he returned to the document. "The sum shall be placed in trust, with distributions of $50,000 annually contingent upon Jacob's continued employment at Montgomery Developments in whatever capacity the Board of Trustees deems appropriate based on his performance and contribution." "This is outrageous." Jacob slammed his hand on the table. "I am the CEO. The company is mine by right." "Actually," Howard interrupted gently, "that brings us to the next section of the will, which addresses the business assets separately from personal property." He turned to a new document, this one bearing the company logo. "Regarding Montgomery Developments and all associated business entities, I have executed a separate succession plan with the following provisions." Jacob seemed to calm slightly, clearly expecting this document to correct what he perceived as an initial error. Diane's expression similarly shifted from shock to cautious anticipation. Howard read on. Having built this company from nothing into an enterprise valued at over $45 million, I consider its future direction to be a matter of significant importance, not merely as a financial asset, but as a living legacy that provides jobs, housing, and community resources to thousands of people. Emma caught my eye across the table, a small, sad smile acknowledging her father's values shining through even in legal documents. It has been my observation over recent years that the fundamental vision and values upon which Montgomery Developments was built are at risk of being compromised in favor of short-term profitability and individual enrichment. This outcome would betray not only my life's work, but the communities and employees who have contributed to our success. Jacob shifted uncomfortably, his expression darkening as the implications became clear. Therefore, effective upon my death, Montgomery Developments shall be governed by a board of trustees consisting of the following individuals: Thomas Richardson, my trusted friend and business partner of 30 years; Susan Chen, whose institutional knowledge and loyalty have been invaluable; Howard Goldstein, my attorney and advisor; and Richard Donnelly, whose commitment to our community development mission embodies the company's core purpose. Jacob half rose from his chair. This cannot be legal. You cannot just change corporate governance through a will. Howard paused, removing his glasses deliberately. Actually, Jacob is the sole shareholder of a privately held company. Your father had complete legal authority to determine succession planning. Furthermore, these changes were properly executed through corporate resolutions and filed with the appropriate authorities 3 months ago. The documents bear your signature as witness, though I suspect you may not have read them carefully when your father asked you to sign. I recalled Jacob complaining about tedious paperwork William had insisted he sign during one of his brief hospital visits. At the time, it had seemed like routine business matters, but now the full extent of William's foresight became clear. As for your current position, Howard continued, replacing his glasses and returning to the document, Jacob Montgomery shall retain the title of Chief Executive Officer, reporting directly to the Board of Trustees, with compensation and authority to be determined based on performance and adherence to the company's established values and practices. In other words, Jacob would keep his title, but with actual oversight and accountability, his authority severely curtailed. The clever structure allowed him to save face publicly while ensuring he could do no damage to William's legacy. Diane's composure finally broke. This is ridiculous. You cannot possibly expect us to accept these terms. We will contest the will immediately. Howard nodded as if expecting this reaction. You are certainly entitled to pursue that course of action. However, there is an additional provision you should be aware of. He flipped to the next page. Should any beneficiary contest any portion of this will or the associated business succession plan, their entire inheritance shall be immediately forfeited and distributed to the Montgomery Community Development Foundation. The legal checkmate left Jacob and Diane visibly stunned. A contested will would be public, potentially embarrassing, almost certainly unsuccessful given William's careful planning, and would result in Jacob losing even the $1 million he had been granted. Howard allowed a moment for this information to sink in before continuing. Shall I proceed to the provisions regarding the remainder of the estate? Jacob slumped back in his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. Diane stared straight ahead, her expression a brittle mask of controlled fury. Across the table, Emma reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. With regard to my personal property and remaining assets, Howard read his voice, gently, slightly. To my beloved wife, Nettie, who stood by me when I had nothing and loved me for who I was, rather than what I owned. The simple phrase brought tears to my eyes, William's voice so clearly present in the words. I leave our family home at 247 Beacon Street, all personal possessions contained therein, all vehicles and recreational property, and the sum of $30 million to be placed in trust with full discretionary control in her hands. Beside me, Emma gave a small gasp of surprise at the figure. Jacob's head snapped up, his expression a mixture of disbelief and renewed anger. Howard continued reading William's message to me. Nettie has been not merely my wife, but my partner, in every sense of the word. Her support, wisdom, and unwavering integrity made my success possible. While no financial provision can adequately express my gratitude for 40 years of profound partnership, it is my hope that this will ensure her comfort and security for the remainder of her life, free from financial constraint or dependency. The thoughtfulness of William's planning, the clear message it sent about how he valued my contribution to our shared life, brought fresh tears. Even in death, he was protecting me, honoring me, and ensuring that our son could not dismiss or control me. To my daughter, Emma, Howard read next, whose compassion, intelligence, and work ethic have made me proud every day of her life. I leave the sum of $10 million. Emma's hand tightened around mine in surprise. She had never expected or sought an inheritance, having built her medical career through her own efforts. It is my hope that this inheritance will allow Emma to expand her pediatric practice into underserved communities, a mission she has often discussed but found financially challenging. I also establish a trust of $2 million for the educational expenses of her children, my beloved grandchildren, whose futures represent the true purpose of wealth to create opportunity for the next generation to contribute meaningfully to society. David put his arm around Emma's shoulders as she wiped away tears. William had listened to and valued her dreams, providing the means to achieve them without ever having discussed it directly with her. For my grandchildren, through Jacob, Howard continued, I established separate educational trusts of $1 million each to be controlled by the same board of trustees governing the company, with distributions made directly to educational institutions. These funds may not be accessed by their parents for any purpose. Jacob and Diane exchanged glances, clearly calculating the implications of this arrangement. Their children would be provided for, but neither of them would have access to or control over those funds. The remainder of my estate, Howard read, I direct to the Montgomery Community Development Foundation to continue the work of creating affordable housing, educational opportunities, and economic development in the communities where our company began and prospered. Howard closed the document and looked around the table. There are additional details regarding tax planning, specific bequests to longtime employees, and charitable donations, but those are the primary provisions of William Montgomery's estate plan. Are there any questions I can address at this time? The silence that followed was profound, broken only by Jacob pushing back his chair with such force that it nearly toppled. This is not over, he said, his voice low and threatening. My father was not in his right mind at the end. The medications, the illness, they affected his judgment. I will not allow his legacy, my birthright, to be stolen from me. Howard shook his head slightly. I anticipated this reaction, Jacob, which is why William took additional steps to document his mental competence and the rationale behind his decisions. He turned to his assistant, who had entered quietly during the reading. Please set up the video. Within moments, a large screen descended from the ceiling, and Howard started a video recording. William's face appeared gaunt from illness, but with eyes clear and focused. The recording was dated just 3 weeks before his death, with a notary visibly present in the frame, along with a physician who introduced himself as William's primary doctor, attesting to his patient's mental competence. I am recording this message, William began, his voice weaker than in health, but his diction precise, to explain in my own words the decisions I have made regarding my estate and business succession. I am doing so of my own free will, with full mental capacity, and after careful consideration over many years. He proceeded to outline the same provisions Howard had just read, explaining his reasoning with painful clarity. To my son Jacob, he said, looking directly into the camera as if speaking to him personally, I know these provisions will anger and hurt you. For that I am truly sorry. But as your father, I have watched with increasing concern as you have demonstrated values contrary to everything I tried to teach you. You have treated employees with disrespect, prioritized appearance over substance, and shown concerning disregard for the impact of your business decisions on real people's lives. Jacob's face had gone pale, his eyes fixed on his father's image. The $1 million provision is not meant as punishment but as an opportunity. It ensures you will have comfort but requires you to earn your position and any additional wealth through actual contribution and merit. In time, I hope you will understand that this is an act of love from a father who wants his son to become the man he is capable of being, rather than the entitled shortcut-seeking person you have allowed yourself to become. William then addressed Emma briefly, thanking her for embodying the values of compassion and integrity he had tried to instill in both his children. But it was his message to me that formed the emotional center of the recording. To my Nettie, he said, his expression softening visibly, my partner, my love, my conscience, and my heart for 40 years. You believed in me when I had nothing. You worked double shifts as a nurse to support my dreams. You raised our children while I built a business. You kept me grounded when success might have changed me. Everything I achieved, we achieved together. Tears streamed down my face as William continued. I know that Jacob has already begun positioning himself to control the estate and limit your access to what we built together. This plan ensures that cannot happen. The home is yours, the resources are yours, your future is secure beyond any possibility of interference. This represents not generosity but justice, a recognition of your equal contribution to everything we created together. The recording continued for several more minutes, William addressing each of the trustees, explaining their selection and his hopes for the company's future. When it ended, the room remained silent, the impact of William's words still reverberating. Jacob was the first to move, standing abruptly and pulling Diane up beside him. This is a farce, a carefully staged performance by a dying man manipulated by his advisors and my sister. We will be speaking to our attorneys immediately. Howard remained unperturbed. That is your right, Jacob, but I remind you of the contestation clause and the video evidence of your father's competence. Any legal challenge would almost certainly fail, while guaranteeing the forfeiture of your inheritance and public exposure of the concerns your father expressed. Jacob hesitated, visibly calculating his options. Diane leaned in, whispering urgently in his ear. After a tense moment, he gathered his papers and strode toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final bitter comment. Congratulations, Mother. You have successfully turned my father against me and secured your comfortable future. I hope it brings you satisfaction. Before I could respond, Diane added her own parting shot. Do not expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. We will not expose them to someone who participated in their disinheritance. As the door closed behind them, the remaining attendees sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Thomas Richardson spoke, his voice gentle. Nettie, I want you to know that William discussed his plans with me extensively. This was not a decision made in anger or haste, but with genuine concern for both the company's future and Jacob's character development. He loved his son, but he recognized the damage his own indulgence had caused. Susan nodded agreement. In his last year, Mr. Montgomery spoke often about legacy, not in terms of money, but of values. He was determined that the company continue to serve its original purpose of creating quality housing and community spaces, not just generating maximum profit. Howard closed his folders and addressed me directly. Nettie, there will be practical matters to discuss regarding the trusts and property transfers, but those can wait for another day. For now, know that William ensured your security in every possible way. As the meeting concluded and people began to leave, Emma remained beside me, her arm around my shoulders. Dad knew exactly what he was doing, she said softly. He protected you, the company, and even Jacob from himself in his own way. I nodded, still processing the enormity of what had just occurred. My William had anticipated everything, had seen clearly what I had tried to deny about our son, and had acted decisively to protect all that we had built together. In his final acts, he had demonstrated once again the integrity and foresight that had made him not just a successful businessman, but a truly good man. As Emma and David drove me home to the house that was now unquestionably mine, I felt William's presence more strongly than at any time since his death. Looking out at the city we had built our lives in, I whispered a silent thank you to the man who had loved me enough to ensure that justice would prevail even after he was gone. 1 year has passed since that dramatic will reading in Howard's office. The seasons have completed their cycle, and I have experienced all the firsts without William. The first Christmas, the first anniversary, the first birthday celebrated alone. Grief remains a constant companion, but its sharp edges have softened somewhat with time, and with the comfort of knowing that William's final act was to protect both me and the legacy we built together. The home that Jacob and Diane had been so eager to sell remains mine, though I have made some changes that bring me comfort. William's study is now my reading room, filled with photographs of our life together and mementos of our journey from that tiny first apartment to the success we ultimately achieved. I have converted one of the guest rooms into an art studio, rediscovering a passion for painting that I had set aside during the busy years of raising children and supporting William's career. The $30 million William left me has been carefully managed with Howard's guidance. I have established a nursing scholarship at Boston University in William's name, providing full tuition for 5 students annually who commit to working in underserved communities after graduation. I have also become actively involved in the Montgomery Community Development Foundation, finding unexpected fulfillment in continuing the work that meant so much to William. Emma's pediatric practice has expanded significantly with the resources her father provided. She has opened a second clinic in a low-income neighborhood of Boston, offering sliding scale fees and specialized care for children with chronic conditions. Her own children are thriving, visiting me several times a week and filling the house with the laughter and energy that keep loneliness at bay. As for Jacob, the aftermath of the will reading was as difficult as might be expected. True to his threat, he consulted with several attorneys about contesting the will, but each one confirmed what Howard had said. William's careful planning documented mental competence, and the contestation clause made any challenge both futile and financially self-destructive. For 2 months following the reading, Jacob refused all contact with me or Emma. Diane was seen publicly with a prominent divorce attorney, though they ultimately remained together, perhaps realizing that divorce would further diminish their financial situation. Jacob continued as CEO of Montgomery Developments, in name though, with severely curtailed authority under the watchful eyes of the trustees. The turning point came surprisingly through Jacob's children. His 9-year-old son Tyler called me secretly from a friend's house, saying he missed his grandma and did not understand why he could not visit anymore. That innocent reach across the divide Jacob had created opened a small channel of communication. I began sending letters and cards to the children, never criticizing their parents, but simply expressing my love and interest in their lives. Eventually, Jacob's resistance began to soften, particularly as he confronted the reality of his new position at the company. The Board of Trustees, true to William's wishes, did not fire Jacob, but instead gave him clear, limited responsibilities with specific performance metrics. For perhaps the first time in his life, he was being held genuinely accountable for his work. 3 months ago, Jacob requested a meeting with me, arriving at the house alone and visibly uncomfortable. Our conversation was stilted at first, years of resentment and recent betrayal, creating a chasm between us. But as we talked, sitting in the garden, William had loved something shifted subtly. I did not understand what Dad was trying to teach me, Jacob admitted after nearly an hour of circling the central issues. I thought the business was about profit margins and expansion about status and power. The trustees keep talking about community impact and long-term sustainability. I thought they were naive, out of touch with modern business practices. And now? I prompted gently. He looked down at his hands, so similar to William's, but without the calluses his father had earned in those early years of physical labor. Now I am being forced to actually learn the business from the ground up. Thomas has me reviewing every aspect of operations, from construction quality to tenant relations. Susan has introduced me to employees who have been with the company for decades, people whose names I never bothered to learn before. The humility in his voice was new, suggesting that William's plan might be working exactly as intended. I am not saying I agree with how Dad handled things, Jacob added quickly, some of his old defensiveness returning. But I am beginning to understand that there was more to his success than I realized. It was a small step, but a significant one. Since that conversation, Jacob has begun bringing his children for Sunday dinners occasionally. Diane rarely accompanies them, but the opportunity to rebuild some relationship with my grandchildren brings me genuine joy. Whether Jacob is motivated by genuine growth or simply by the recognition that his financial future depends on demonstrating change, only time will tell. But I choose to believe that William knew his son better than anyone and designed a plan that might ultimately save him from his worst instincts. The Board of Trustees has been managing Montgomery Developments with remarkable success, honoring William's vision while adapting to changing markets. They have continued his practice of prioritizing quality construction, fair pricing, and community integration. Profits have remained strong, though perhaps not as aggressively maximized as Jacob would have preferred. More importantly, the company's reputation for integrity and social responsibility has only grown. In a development that would have amused William greatly, Diane has recently launched a charitable foundation of her own, though I suspect the motivation has more to do with social standing than genuine philanthropy. Still, good works done for complicated reasons remain good works, and perhaps she too will find unexpected fulfillment in contributing rather than merely accumulating. As for me, I am learning to build a life without William's physical presence while feeling his influence in everything around me. The garden blooms with the perennials he planted. The company continues the work he began, and the family navigates its complicated relationships with the framework he thoughtfully provided. In protecting me from Jacob's attempt to seize control, William gave me not just financial security but the freedom to discover who Nettie Montgomery is on her own. I often sit in the garden at dusk, William's favorite time of day, and reflect on the journey we shared. From that first meeting in the hospital when he talked endlessly about his dreams, while I wrapped his broken arm, to the empire we built together through decades of partnership, to his final act of ensuring justice and protection for all he valued. In the end, William's greatest legacy was not the millions of dollars or the successful company, but the values he upheld and the love he expressed even from beyond the grave. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's true character was revealed in an unexpected way? Or perhaps you have witnessed justice unfold in your own family when you least expected it. I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this account of how my husband protected our legacy touched something in you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others who might find comfort or wisdom in it. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in the integrity with which we live and the love we share with others.